Okay. And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Codementor Office Hours. My name is Valentine. Thank you all for joining us. Today, I'm really excited to be here with Deepank. So Deepank has worked at LinkedIn and Google before, and I was an engineering manager at Airbnb in the pricing team. As you may all know, Airbnb is an awesome community and marketplace that connects people looking to rent their homes with people who are looking for accommodations. I'm sure you all have questions for Deepank, so throughout the broadcast, feel free to ask questions in the questions and answers section right under the video. And to get us started, Deepank will give us a quick presentation on time management, and we'll be ending with a live Q&A. So if you have any questions again, feel free to add them in the Q&A section under this video, and we'll get to as many as possible. So yeah, Deepank, if you want to get us started, we're looking forward to learning more about your experience and today's topic.
Cool. Thanks, Valentine. Looking forward to chatting with you all about time management. So I'm currently working as an Eng manager in the pricing team, and I know it's difficult to make the transition from an IC to management. So I want to chat more about how you should be managing your time, both as an IC and as a manager. So to start us off, so let's go into two types of calendars, and I'm guessing you can easily see which calendar belongs to whom. So for instance, on the left-hand side, this is what a typical IC calendar might look like, where you start off your day with a daily stand-up, you do some emails, you do some code reviews, and then you're off to lunch. Then you have a dedicated time period or block of time where you are doing heads down coding for about 3 hours. You take a break, you do some meetings, come back, have another dedicated 2 to 3 hour block for coding. So as an IC, whenever I've worked in the past, and all the most effective programmers or coders that I've seen, they always work in 2 to 3 hour blocks of time and would have at least 2 blocks of dedicated time period during the day in which they are coding. And that's where most of their progress would come through. So that's what a typical effective IC calendar would look like. Looking at it on the right hand side, this is what a typical manager calendar looks like, or even a tech lead who's doing more management, even if you're not doing more personalized management. And here you see work happening in 30 to 60-minute blocks. There's no block of time which is more than 60 minutes, as you can see. The day starts off with a leads meeting, goes on to do the daily stand-up. After that, you have a bunch of meetings with your direct reports. Even your lunches would be with some either a cross-functional partner or someone. You would have some sort of project weekly meetings, things like those stuff regarding your projects. You'll be spending some time on recruiting, right? So you will be doing interviews, you'll be doing cell calls, and you would also be doing some upward management and lateral management besides just meeting with your direct reports and getting to know what's happening during the day. So as you can see, there are a lot of context switches, and all of the time that is being spent is in the meeting. So meetings is actually the work. So that's how the two calendars would look like. Again, these can change and may vary, but let's talk about some of the general characteristics of these calendars to see how stuff happens. So what are the characteristics of an IC calendar? So work is generally done, as I said, in blocks of uninterrupted hours of time. It usually, if you're trying to solve a difficult problem or you're trying to code up something, then it always requires you some time to build up the flow and sort of put things into your cache, so as to say, and go deep into the code and try to work through it. So it will usually take you 20 to 30 minutes before you even actually get the work started. So it always makes sense to work on something for over 2 to 3 hours of block for you to showcase any progress. In this case, if you talk to any individual contributor or a person who's working mostly on coding, for them, meetings are always a distraction. And anytime a context switch happens, it's disastrous. So whenever you're going and talking to someone, if you're a manager and you're talking to a direct report, make sure that you're not interrupting their flow of thought, because that's usually disastrous for them. The worst that can happen is people coming in and going out and just distracting someone a lot. Um, that's what the characteristics of an IC calendar looks like. Let's move into what a manager's calendar looks like. So as I said before, 30 to 60-minute time blocks. So this is how, whenever you're going into a meeting or whenever you're going into something, you are going to do a context switch within 30 to 60 minutes. So you do not get a chance to delve deeper into the problem, but rather you're looking to set up context and come out of the meeting with some small actionable items which you can get to afterwards. Your meetings are your main work. But having said that, every meeting should have some follow-ups or things to be done afterwards for a meeting to be successful. So you should always keep that in mind. So if, for instance, 80% of your calendar is blocked with meetings, as you saw over here, then you don't have a lot of time for doing follow-ups. So either you'll be doing follow-ups in your own time after you've gone home, or you would not be doing follow-ups, in which case most of your meetings are not being really effective. So anytime you're meeting with someone for 30 minutes, for instance, there'll always be 5 to 10 minutes worth of follow-ups to do. So always keep that in mind when you're scheduling meetings, that each meeting has some sort of a homework associated with it, like either pre-work or post-work. Then what are the types of meetings that you'll be doing? So one way to classify the type of meetings is you will be meeting with your direct reports. You will be meeting with upper levels of management, and you'll be meeting with your peers, both cross-functional and other engineering teams. So those are the meetings which are interpersonal or working with people. There'll be meetings around projects and teams, which you will be going to as well, in which case you will be talking more about that specific project. Besides this, you will also be spending some time in recruiting, meeting with your recruiters, doing interviews, doing sell calls, getting people excited about coming to your team. So these are some of the different types of meetings, and often you will often be doing multiple of these types in a single day. So you will be switching context between hiring versus working with people versus doing upper management versus doing your project work. So lots of context switches, and making sure that you're having enough time to do follow-ups or pre-works before a meeting. Cool. So before I go into the next topic, so we basically looked at what two different types of calendars looks like, what are the characteristics of an IC calendar, what are the characteristics of a manager's calendar. Now, this was a section where things are very different between an IC and a manager. The next slide is about time management, which is generally both applicable to an IC as well as a manager. So think of, so you have multiple tasks that can come in, right? And there are multiple ways to schedule your tasks. And as computer engineers, all of you know about scheduling. So there are various books and things which talk about scheduling. For instance, there's the Getting Things Done, which says you should do the task which requires less than 2 minutes as soon as possible, like right now. And there are other books which gives other types of advice in terms of task scheduling. Our computer systems do task scheduling in certain ways as well. So what I'm going to talk about is task scheduling based on two dimensions, one being the urgency and the other being the importance. So if you were to classify every task into whether it is important or non-important, a binary value, and whether it is urgent or not urgent, then it could fall into one out of these four quadrants that you see on the slide, right? So anything which is important as well as urgent. Uh, what are some examples of that? Let's say your site is down. That's both important and urgent. These are mostly crisis and emergency. So if you are spending a lot of your time doing both important and urgent tasks, then basically you are in a firefighting mode, and that can work for a small period of time. But if you do that more often, you will quickly see that you're burning out and you don't have a good work-life balance. So let's look at another quadrant. Let's look at things which are important but not urgent. So this is the quadrant. As you can see, it has marked as green. This is the quadrant where you should be spending most of your time in. This is where both as a manager and as an IC, you should be doing your planning. You should be looking forward to doing more of your important tasks. And as an IC, for instance, whenever you're developing a new service, you are putting in time to not have the service go into a crisis mode. Similarly, whenever you're developing a new project, you are doing the planning up front and you are making tasks in such a way that you are tackling most of the important things first. The goal of an effective time management or the goal of an effective task scheduling is to do your important tasks before they get into the urgent category, because every task at a certain point in their time would get into the urgent category. When we were all in college, the way we used to work was, if the professor sets us a deadline of April 10th, then April 9th is the time when we'll actually start working on it. And we were primarily in that Q1, in that crisis emergency mode, and we'd be spending most of our time during that time period. But as we get better and more mature, I think we should be spending most of our time in this second quadrant, where you actually start work on it April 3rd instead of starting work on it April 9th. So every task you have would someday become urgent if you don't do it. So the goal of this is to actually do a task before it gets into Q1, right? So those are the quadrants where we looked at important tasks. Now, what about not important tasks? So as a manager, will often more often than not, you will get a lot of things which are urgent, but they are not important. These are mostly interruptions, where somebody might send you an email, hey, I need this ASAP. Now you have to be very cognizant of the fact. So knowing whether something is urgent or not urgent is easy, because every task usually has a deadline associated with it, and you know whether that deadline is now or not. Knowing something, whether something is important or not important, is not that easy. And that's where you need to have a good compass in your head as to what is your end goal, what is your end game. And that determines whether something is important or not important. So all of the things which are urgent and not important are interruptions. And my logic towards targeting most of these is to just say no. Like, you should be saying no 5 times for every 2 times you're saying yes. You'll be getting a lot of interruptions, but the goal is not to spend time here, but the only time you spend here are saying no or delegating to the right person. And a lot of times as a manager, you're there to build connections. You're sort of like a middleman. So if something is not important to you, but you know that this might be important, or this might be something which somebody else would be working into, you just build that connection and you delegate or route the query to another person. And then the last quadrant, not much time to spend there, but this is mostly the not urgent and not important category. These are time wasters. Now, some time wasters you need, right? Like, you can't always be working on important things. You want to goof around a little bit as well. So there'll always be things that you'll be doing in your day which are neither important nor urgent, but they are required for your sanity. But be cognizant of that those are mostly time wasters. So you should not be spending a lot of your time there. Or if you do spend a lot of your time there in office, be prepared to spend the same amount of time for the other stuff as well. So in terms of your time management, in an ideal world, you should not be spending time in Q1, but there will always be things which will come up. So try to keep that to a minimum. Try to spend most of your time, 60 to 70% of your time in Q2, where you are looking into tasks which are important but not urgent. Then you can spend your rest of the time on interruptions and time wasters, but always try to strive to keep them to a minimum. So that's mostly the urgency and importance metrics. And even if you don't do anything or take out anything from this discussion, if you just take this thing that whenever you have a task in your mind and you sort of categorize into two binary variables on urgency and importance, and then decide whether to schedule it now versus later, that would be the most important thing to take out from this discussion. So last two things that I want to cover before we open it up for questions. First is, and I think I covered this a little bit briefly, is the myth of multitasking, or basically context switching and multitasking. Just like in processors, multitasking for human beings is costly. And it, like, whenever you are context switching or whenever you're multitasking, especially as an IC, but even more so as a manager, more at a strategic level, context switches are costly and they do lead to lost productivity. Effective multitasking is really, really hard. In fact, a very few people claim that they can be effective multitaskers. And even then, most of the times, most of the studies have shown that they are not. So doing something once and then going on to do something else is always better than being effective at multitasking. At least personally, I'm not someone who can multitask really well, and I try to take things serially. I don't think I have multiple cores in my brain to be able to keep things in my head about different things. That is something to keep in mind. So I never say try to be a good multitasker. That's not the way about going about things. It's always try to find out what's the most important thing that you can do today, and do that. And then do your context switch and be cognizant of when you're doing context switches. And this sort of applies to both the projects that you are working on. So for instance, as an IC, try to keep your ICs working on one project at a time, or two at max if there are like dependencies in which a person would be like free for a while waiting on something. But try to keep multitasking to a bare minimum. So yeah, so that's pretty much the things that I wanted to cover. So just to do a review, we talked about two different types of calendars and how your calendar changes from an IC to a manager, how you start before you were working in 2 to 3 hour blocks of time. Now you're working more than 30 to 60 minutes blocks of time. We also talked about how to schedule tasks with urgency and importance as two characteristics to keep in mind. We talked about the myth of multitasking and how context switch can be very bad for you. Now, the very last thing that I want to talk about is just small tips and tricks which has worked for me in the past and hopefully might be very useful for you. First is one-on-one blocks. So I tend to do my one-on-ones in blocks of time. So I'll schedule like 4 of them back to back in a 2-hour block, or 6 of them back to back in a 3-hour block. That generally works because then I'm in the mindset of one-on-ones, and it helps me plan my day more effectively. So especially if you're having a lot of one-on-ones, this is super useful. Second is doing scheduled heads down time. So always schedule some time in your calendar during which you're not working or not meeting people, but rather having a heads down time, which is very useful if you're thinking about strategy, if you're trying to do some work, because otherwise meetings will run you rather than you running the meeting. So it's super useful to have some scheduled heads down time, no matter how busy you are. Third thing which I'm starting to do now is to color code my calendar a little bit so that you know what's the amount of time you're spending in recruiting versus meeting with your direct reports versus project time. So that sort of helps you uh, clarify how much percentage of your time is you're actually spending on your various activities. Fourth, I already covered, but always have time for follow-ups. So never think of your job as done after you have gone through the meeting, but always have time for follow-ups. So if you are spending 80% of your time in meetings, then you're not getting your job done. You are being very ineffective because you don't have enough time to do follow-ups after that. And last, always accept or decline and ask other people to accept or decline as well. That just keeps your calendar clean because you'll always get a lot of incoming requests. And if you haven't accepted things or you have things on your calendar which are something that you're not going to go to, then it's very hard for people to schedule stuff on your calendar. And your calendar should be one of the most accessible things uh, for everyone else because every time somebody wants to schedule a meeting, if you're a manager and you'll always be the bottleneck in terms of finding time. So yeah, so that's pretty much it from my side. So let's open it up for questions.
Thanks a lot, Deepank. We actually got a few questions from the audience already. Fernando is asking if you spend time discussing technical designs of features with the team, and if yes, what's your role in there?
So yes, that's a great question. I do spend time discussing technical designs and features with the team. My role is often to ask questions, so sometimes, so that there are two ways you can go about it, right? There's one way is here's what I think how things should be happening, and you always have opinions because you have done system designs in the past. The other way is you actually give the benefit of doubt to the person who's actually presenting and always asking questions rather than sharing opinion. And you oftentimes you learn a lot based on that.
Okay, thanks a lot. We also have Harry asking, as an engineering manager, what is your favorite productivity hack?
Favorite productivity hack. So this is one thing that I do in meetings is whenever I'm starting a meeting, actually the sort of said that before when we were starting the discussion is meetings are the main work that you'll be doing. So whenever I'm starting a meeting, I'll always start the meeting with this meeting will be successful and you fill in the blank with that. So that sort of sets the tone for the meeting. And all of you know, whoever is part of that meeting, that this meeting has been successful or not been successful.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, as I mentioned, I work in the pricing team. I guess we're all curious to hear more about your day-to-day as well as the day-to-day of your team. What does it look like?
Sorry, say that again.
I was asking about your day-to-day and the day-to-day of your team. As mentioned, you work in the pricing team at Airbnb.
So in terms of the calendar, I sort of took one day of my calendar and pasted it in there, anonymized it. In terms of the calendar for an IC, I did the same thing. So the day-to-day for an engineer on the pricing team would look like starting with a stand-up or a project meeting, going through some code reviews, having blocks of time where they're actually coding. And for me, it pretty much looks all over the place with like 30 to 60 minutes blocks sprinkled all over the place.
Oh, cool, awesome. We just got a notification from Ariel. Ariel said he didn't hear what you said about your favorite productivity hack. Would you be able to repeat that for us?
Yes, so my favorite productivity hack is whenever I'm starting a meeting, I always say this meeting will be successful if, and then fill in the blank.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now, Priyank is asking how you keep track of time spent by individual team members on individual tasks. Do you use any software for that?
No, I don't. And in fact, I don't want to do any micromanagement in terms of the time spent by individual people on various tasks. What I do with people is hold them accountable in terms of things that they plan to do within a period of time. So, for instance, if some project is going to go on for 3 weeks, then I'll do weekly check-ins with them, but that's pretty much it. And people are generally free to spend their time as they wish during that time period.
Okay, awesome. And so yeah, you mentioned micromanaging. Harry's asking if micromanaging time in blocks necessarily leads to mental overheads. Yes or no, in your opinion?
So I don't think so. There is an overhead, like whenever you are coming in, starting your day, at least 15 to 20 minutes in the beginning of your day, you would be spending time to make sure that you have your rest of your day planned and organized in a good way. But I think that's a time well spent.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, could you tell us more about how you split your time between your different responsibilities? A bit more in detail, if you can expand on this.
Yes. So let's go through some of the different responsibilities. So one is project time, the other is recruiting, then third is time spent on meetings with direct reports, fourth is time spent cross-functionally with other engineering managers or project managers. So in general, in a normal time period, I would be spending about 20 to 25% of my time recruiting, 30% of my time meeting with my direct reports, 20 to 30% of my time on projects, and the rest of the time on the cross-functional team meetings that I'll be having with other people.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so you said that you don't really use time management softwares to manage the time of your team. Do you use any other time management software maybe for yourself or other?
No, I don't. The tools that I use are really simple. So I use my Google Calendar very judiciously. Like I'll be spending my beginning of my day, first 15 minutes on my Google Calendar, making sure things are done well. Then I use Inbox again, the Google Inbox really well. There's like a snooze functionality, and I generally categorize things into labels for all the emails, whether I'm awaiting a reply on something or like I want to get to something at a later point in time, and then just marking something as to do in the Gmail. And the last thing that I use is my text editor. I have a window of Sublime Text open in which I will generally just put in tasks for me to think about or for me to do. So I don't use any fancy tools whatsoever. It's a text editor, my Google Inbox, and calendar.
Okay. Yeah, because Fernando asked asked how you handle your to-dos. But I guess that just answered the question. Okay. And in terms of leading developers, what are, in your opinions, the most crucial things that can ensure that the team and also the developers individual can be successful?
Yes. So there are multiple things. We mostly covered time management here, and in terms of time management, it's making sure that they have enough time for them to be able to go into the code and work on it rather than having a lot of distractions. So I'm always looking to audit meetings and see if some meeting is not adding enough value. There's always a trade-off between keeping everyone informed versus having a lot of distractions. So there's always a thin line or a balance between the two. Second thing is not having multiple tasks for a person at any given point in time. And in fact, whenever I'm working with an individual, we'll set OKRs, or which is sort of an industry term, but I should, like, it's an acronym, and every time I'm saying an acronym, I should probably mention that OKRs is objectives and key results. So at the start of the quarter, we'll set up goals for people in terms of these are the 2 or 3 things that they will be focusing on for this quarter. And when they do that, that means that they are successful. And once we have done that, once people know what their overall goals for the quarter are and how they relate to their career growth, and we don't have a lot of distractions during the time period that they are working on things, that's pretty much things that make things successful for people.
Okay, thanks for this. In addition to minimizing these sort of distractions, Prank is asking if you do anything else in specific to boost the productivity of your team.
So one thing that I do pretty often is always look into meetings and always be auditing meetings. And then another thing is whenever I'm having one-on-ones, 2 questions that I'll ask. 1, what's top of your mind? 2, what can I do to help? Or what are the pain points that you're currently facing, which I can help remove? So those generally give me good ideas of things or places where I can spend my time on, which will help increase productivity for them.
So I'm just unmuting myself. It takes some time. Yeah, Harry said that you said that for every 2 times you say yes, you should say no at least 5 times. So Harry's wondering if this creates some friction in your team, and also how you continue to keep saying no so many times without offending other people, like your engineers.
Yeah, so there are tricks to saying no, right? It's not like if somebody comes and says to you, "Can you do X?" You don't really say no. That's just rude. But there are good ways of saying no. One of the ways of saying no is, "Hey, maybe I'm not the best person to do this, but maybe you can go and talk to this person for whom that thing would actually be important." So you are acting as a connective tissue. In fact, what like managers are the people who would be knowing more about different teams, what they are doing, different people, what their individual responsibilities are. You could also say no by delegating it to someone else, right? Like you can say, "Hey, by the way, I think this is the like, can you take care of this for me?" The other is the other way of saying no, and this is very useful when you're working with someone who's higher up in chain from you, is, "Hey, I would love to work on this, but I'm also working on X and Y. What do you think I should prioritize first? Because if I do this plus X plus Y, I will not be doing justice to either of them." So have them make that decision, and hopefully they can help you prioritize things better. So yeah, so and then there'll always be times where you can just say no. But whenever you're saying yes to something, be aware that if you're saying yes to it, then you're actually working on it.
Makes sense. Very, very diplomatic indeed. Yeah, going back to working at Airbnb, can you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between the engineering managers and the product managers?
Yeah, so engineering managers and product managers are sort of joined at hip in a way, right? Like generally an engineering manager would be working with one product manager and we'll be spending a lot of time together in order to prioritize features or coming up with a strategy for the team. And product managers have very different responsibilities from engineering managers. The way I see it is product manager is always focusing more on the product, the engineering manager is focusing more from the technology side and coming from the technology. It's always good to have a healthy tension as well between the two. But if the relationship is done right, it's super useful.
Going to more culture-oriented questions. What's the ideal or best team culture in your opinion?
So Airbnb, as you know, is very much focused on culture and like there are multiple ways to go about it, but I think some of the things that I think are really useful is having a very collaborative culture where everybody is trying to root for everyone else's success, to be never be afraid of taking risk, and in fact taking intelligent risks is always important, and three, sort of be a sort of, this is Airbnb lingo, but be a serial entrepreneur, like uh, uh, al always be hacking and looking for best solutions and optimizing for things, and nothing is ever done perfect the first time around, and the more iterative you are around doing things, and the smarter you are in terms of spending your time or effort on, the better the results would be.
Awesome, thanks. We got another question from the audience from Chetan. Chetan's asking if you also have a role for release manager, and if it's for each product or across products more generally.
Say that again. I missed the first part of the question.
Question was, do you have a role for release manager? And if yes, is the release manager for each product or across products?
So at Airbnb, we don't really have release managers, and engineers are the ones who are deploying their code. So every engineer is a release manager in a way. So yeah.
Another question from the audience, from Fernando. So considering a time frame of 2 weeks, like a sprint, what's the net percentage of real productivity time for your team? How would you estimate that?
I hope it's 100%, but I don't really estimate time in terms of productivity time, the amount of time they are coding. But we generally like to keep the amount of meetings. So in a week, the amount of meetings to be less than 10% for individual contributors, and most of their time being spent on actual coding.
Oh,
I think the mic is still
yes.
muted.
How do you balance development speed versus code quality as a team?
That's an excellent question. Yes, it's a trade-off. So I sort of went to it earlier a little bit, but I think it's worth spending some time on it. Code quality is important, and in fact, if your code quality is good, then your development speed would be faster as well, although that doesn't happen in the short term, right? So for instance, you can build things not the right way in order to get something shipped before a deadline, and then sort of work on the code quality. Or if you don't work on the code quality, you can always work on additional features, but those additional features, every time you're building an additional feature on top of a shaky base, it will take you more time to actually work on that particular feature, and it would slow down your productivity so much that you would realize, oh my God, we're not really getting things done, let's do a rewrite. So the best way of going about things, and the way that we generally do things, is we understand that we don't want to be perfect, and we don't want to go out with zero tech debt, so as to say, right? Like there will always be some tech debt, but we always want to manage that debt to not get to a place where things are not perfect. So one of the things that we'll do is, oftentimes people will put in some tech debt in order to ship things at a certain time or date, but take the time right after that to sort of remove some of the shortcuts and do things the right way. So it's always a balance, and it's a fine balance, and you can over-index on either code quality or development speed, but taking a stab at it every once in a while is useful.
Okay. Another question from the audience. So according to you, what are the key elements of a good product requirement document? And do you have any templates for reference?
Yeah, so we generally start off with one-pagers, like a one-page document in terms of what is the problem that we are trying to solve, how do we know when we have solved it, what would be our metrics for success, and what would be the experiment plan. So we have a template which has all of these questions, and you fill it in with like and try to keep it into a one page, although sometimes it goes to 2 pages as well.
Okay, and so as an engineering manager, you mentioned also being involved in the hiring process. Can you tell us a little bit about what you look for when you're hiring developers? What are, for instance, some of the red flags and so on?
Sure. So what I look for, 2 or 3 things. First being like what has been the growth pattern for an engineer over time. There'll always be engineers who are coming in from star companies, in which case it's a check mark or university, right? Like, yes, you've done this, yes, you've done this. But there'll always be people who come from star companies or who are working in startups, but they have enough of their stuff on GitHub, or they have their projects mentioned on their website, that you will know that this person is actually working hard and working on things besides their day-to-day job. If somebody is open source something, that's always a good sign. Then in terms of red flags, I usually tend to find those more in the interview. And I think anytime I see arrogance, that's generally a red flag. I always tend to ask a lot of questions in terms of why, and that generally gets to the thing that they're trying to get to. The other thing that I would also try to get in, especially true for little candidates, like candidates coming in from other companies, is why do they want to leave, or like, are they running away from the previous company, or are they running towards the company that they're joining?
I'm not.
It's always either.
I didn't see Deepank. I cannot see you anymore. I don't know if it's only on my end. Anyways, we have another question from the audience.
Should I refresh?
It looks like the video was lost. Maybe let's wait a minute and see if it comes back. So we got another question from Harry. Harry's wondering if you can give us an insider look into new features that Airbnb or your team in particular might be currently working on. So we'll have to wait for a few seconds for Deepank to reconnect. Please bear with us. Thank you. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll try to get to them as soon as possible. Hello. I think Deepank lost his connection. Oh, he's reconnecting. All right. Looks like it's taking a little while, but we're getting there. So I just received an email from Deepank telling me that Crowdcast seems to have gone down for him. What I suggested that we wait for maybe another couple minutes, and then if Deepank doesn't manage to get back with us, we'll have to wrap up. In any case, yeah, feel free to write any other questions you may have. I'll be sending a follow-up email after the event with relevant links, useful resources, and anything that we've been talking about today. Let's see. So it looks like Deepank will be able to join us again. Let's see. Oh, he's on the chat. Awesome. Sorry for the inconvenience, everyone. Okay, let's see. Oh, there you go. Invite on screen. It should be working soon. So I just reprompt. Okay.
Hello.
And you're back. Awesome.
Okay, cool.
Can you hear us right now?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. So let me mute myself, and then you can let's just go back to where we were. So we got a question from the audience. It was Harry asking if you could give us an insider's look into new features that Airbnb / your team in particular might be working on. Anything that you can tell us without getting into.
Oh yeah, sure. I think to give you a little bit of overview of what my team works on. So my team works on pricing, and we want pricing for hosts, where hosts can set their min and max price, and we based on the knowledge from the market and doing writing some machine learning algorithms, figure out what's the best price at which people can get booked, and that's what we would suggest to hosts to adopt in terms of the tips that we would give them, or in case of smart pricing, price will fluctuate within the time period, within the price range that they have set. The other thing that we have recently launched are insights. Actually, I wrote a blog post about it on the Airbnb engineering blog. So if you're interested, you should go take a look at it. But we, based on studying the market, then different markets having different things, we can provide certain insights to our hosts for them to optimize their pricing and availability settings such that they can become more successful. So we launched it as an experiment with a new service, and we're seeing some really good results out of it.
Thanks. And if you had to say what the most difficult thing about your job is, okay, the most difficult thing and the thing that you love the most, what you love the most.
Yeah. So I'll go with the thing that I love the most. I think the impact that we are having, and especially with Airbnb, the mission of the company to connect everyone, especially in the world where there's a lot of hatred and things. Airbnb doing its part in order to make the world a better place. That's something that I love the most, and the impact that we have, especially on the pricing side, with price being such a sensitive factor, is something that I love the most. In terms of thing which is the most difficult for me personally, is and always being able to prioritize ruthlessly. That's something that is always difficult and something that I keep in mind.
Great, thank you. And do you have are there any people that you look up to, or mentors whom you work closely with, people that have really inspired you in your career?
Yes, so I always have role models and mentors whenever I'm working in different areas, and my role models and mentors have switched over time. So one thing that I always say is I always tend to keep 3 years ahead, or what I would like to be, or what position I would like to be 3 years from now, and that's where I would choose a role model associated with that, somebody who is at that position in their career where I would like to be 3 years from now. And that changes, right? Like every year or so, I'll take a look at it, and that might change from time to time. So for instance, I've had role models and mentors who have been amazing coders, people who have helped me learn things like functional programming, or doing things without side effects, to the time now when I look up to managers who are really effective at time management, people who have had a lot of impact within the company and have created amazing products.
Yeah, and in terms of resources for engineering managers or aspiring engineering managers, do you have any recommendations, any specific tools or resources that have really?
One thing about so the engineering management is a very different skill from NIC. So if you ask me good resources for learning programming, there are really good resources for that. But engineering management is something that you would learn on the job in a way. But having said that, there are some good books which are not directly related to engineering management, or things like, for instance, if you're trying to do coding, cracking the coding interview will get you there, right? But if you're trying to do management, it's not so much as specific resources which would help you get there, but rather things which would generally make you better. And that's where I think that there's this really good book that I read Seven Habits of Effective People by Stephen Covey, I think, which is really useful. Then, in general, reading more about more in terms of about management, about how do you work with different people, and getting to know different styles of management while you're working, and talking to different people is always helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't want to be taking too much of everyone's time, so we'll be taking a last question from the audience. Harry's asking, as you're working on pricing directly, what would you say is the best time for an Airbnb user to make a booking? Is there like a particular time range when the prices are lowest, something similar to the airline industry?
Yeah, so hopefully that's not the case, right? Like, if we know that there are certain times when the prices are lowest, then we are not doing our job well, and we should be doing our job well. So in terms of lead time, so we sort of classify that as lead time. We try, oh yeah. So in terms of lead time, we try to do a good job in that respect. But having said that, Airbnb has a very diverse user set, and a lot of people are pricing on their own as well, and not using any of our tips, for instance. So you can always find good deals if you look hard enough. Is what I would say.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. Deepank, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think time management is a really important topic. I hope this was useful for everyone. I really enjoyed this conversation, and the questions were really good as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So as mentioned, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with useful links and resources, like things we mentioned throughout the broadcasting. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And thank you again, Deepank, for being with us and taking the time. And yeah, that's it for today's office hours. And take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.